Every day, millions of cameras silently record our lives. Most of the time, nothing happens. But every once in a while, a lens catches something no one ever should have witnessed. This is the most disturbing CCTV footage iceberg, and the deeper we go, the darker it gets. Viewers' discretion is advised. Layer 1. Women targeted at a restaurant. It started the night before. A quiet street before dawn, an empty hour, and a woman simply trying to get home. Before she could reach her doorway, a stranger stepped into her path. He was drunk, unstable, and speaking in broken sentences, but his intentions were clear. All Chenji wanted was to force himself on her. When she resisted, he backed off, not because he'd changed his mind, but because he had a plan. The next evening, she met her friends at a local barbecue shop in Tangshan, a place where people usually went to relax after work. But around 2 a.m., the door opened, and the same man walked in. This time, he wasn't alone. He approached their table, acting as though the previous night had never happened, placing a hand on her back as if she owed him something. Again, she resisted. This second refusal in less than 24 hours was enough to ignite the violence. What happened next spread across China within hours. Chen Zi and several others turned on the group of women. Her attempt at self-defense was met with brutal force. Seeing her friend assaulted, one of the women smashed a bottle over the attacker's head. The store owner tried to intervene verbally, but could only push the fight outside. Bystanders watched as the initial victim was dragged outside by her hair, kicked, and punched repeatedly. Within minutes, about 8 bottles had already been smashed over her head. The other women who tried to help faced the same fate. Beaten and battered, 4 women were injured before the men fled. Security cameras captured everything, and the recordings sparked nationwide outrage. Within days, authorities arrested the 9 men who had participated in the attack. Mass shooting on Chicago train. It was just before dawn. Some people on the Blue Line train were heading to work. Others were returning home after a difficult night shift. The ride felt peaceful, calm enough that several passengers had fallen asleep, planning to wake only when they reached their stop. At 4:30 a.m., CCTV footage captured a man transferring from the Red Line to a Blue Line train heading toward Forest Park Station. At first glance, he looked like any ordinary commuter, carrying a black North Face messenger bag. Inside that bag was a Glock 9mm pistol. Around 5 a.m., as the train passed through Oak Park, the man, wearing a mask, walked between 2 adjoining train cars and, without saying a word, opened fire. His bullets struck 4 sleeping passengers. Moments later, the train arrived at Harlem Station, where he stepped off and left the platform. By the time CTA custodial staff discovered the victims still on the train, the damage was irreversible. 1 passenger had died from a gunshot wound to the abdomen, 2 from multiple gunshot wounds, and the 4th from a shot to the head. Meanwhile, the shooter had already returned to the Blue Line, boarding another train headed toward the loop. There, a CTA staff member recognized him and immediately alerted the Chicago Police Department. An hour after the attack, he was arrested and identified as 30-year-old Ronnie S. Davis. Investigators later confirmed that he had a criminal history, including several prior weapons-related charges. He now faces 4 counts of first-degree murder and is awaiting sentencing. Or Torkor Market mass shooting. That afternoon, the Torkor Market in Bangkok, Thailand, felt just like it usually would. Buying, selling, and dozens of voices overlapping one another. What no one knew was that one man was on his way to take revenge. 61-year-old Noi Praden had hijacked a taxi and forced the driver at gunpoint to take him to the market. When they arrived, they parked near Gate 1, where Noi stepped out of the vehicle. Noi, a vendor at the market, wasn't there to work or drop off his wife. He had come with a purpose. At 12:31 p.m., he opened fire and killed 3 security guards instantly, but he wasn't done. After shooting the guards, Noi walked inside the building and began searching for another security guard named Mr. Nan. In recent times, Noi had gotten into several arguments with others at the market, especially with the security guards. He had accused them of scratching his car, and Mr. Nan, the man he was now hunting for, was someone he had clashed with 5 years earlier. When Noi eventually found Mr. Nan, he shot him multiple times, then began chasing and firing at other security guards nearby. In the chaos, another market vendor was killed and 2 women were injured. Finally, he sat down calmly on a bench and turned the gun on himself. Within minutes, 6 people were dead and 2 severely injured, the market forever stained by the violence that unfolded that day. Layer 2. Hospital ICU hit job in Patna. Chandan Mishra was initially sentenced to death for killing a trader named Rajendra Keshri, along with several other crimes, but in 2020, his death sentence was reduced to life imprisonment. It seemed like he had escaped death, but only for 5 years. In July 2025, he was released on a 15-day parole for medical treatment. That morning, the hospital was calm. Chandan lay in his bed, watched closely by 2 men, waiting for his discharge papers. Meanwhile, another gangster, Omar Sheru Singh, had grown threatened by Chandan's rising influence. The two had once been friends, but their fallout was bitter and permanent. Even from jail, Sheru kept tight control over outside operations. So when he learned Chandan would be out on parole, he decided it was time. From his cell, Sheru contacted his close aide and laid out the plan. The shooters surveyed the hospital for 3 days. Once everything was set, 5 men moved in. At the entrance, security sensed something was off and asked who they were visiting. The gang leader calmly claimed they were there to see their friend's uncle, Chandan. That lie gave them precisely what they needed, his room number. Once they reached the ward, CCTV footage captured the men pulling guns from their pockets and rushing inside. They opened fire immediately. Chandan, still lying in bed, was shot multiple times and died on the spot. One of the men in the room was hit in the leg, while another escaped injury only because he had stepped into the bathroom seconds earlier. After the attack, the gunmen fled, waving their weapons to intimidate onlookers and celebrate. But they wouldn't stay free for long. Within days, police arrested 4 of the 5 shooters. The last suspect remains on the run. Investigators have recovered call records and CCTV footage, enough to take the case to trial. Patient killed in a Kenyan hospital. On the 11th of December 2024, Kenyatta National Hospital admitted a patient named Gilbert Kinyua, who had been referred from another facility. Upon arrival at the neurology ward, he was diagnosed with a rare neurological disorder that caused severe muscle weakness. His condition affected all his limbs. Therefore, he required total nursing care, including tube feeding. Still, Gilbert fought through it, and in time, his conditions stabilized until the night of the 6th of February 2025. The night shift began normally. Nurses checked his vitals and attended to him twice during their rounds. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. But on Friday morning, everything changed. Around 6 a.m., during the ward round, a nurse found Gilbert with his face covered by a blood-stained sheet. Confused, she lifted it and discovered he was dead with a deep cut on his neck. At first, investigators suspected an outsider had entered the hospital. CCTV footage, however, showed no one coming in or out. As detectives examined the scene, they noticed bloody slipper prints leading from Gilbert's bedside to a nearby toilet and then to a side room. That room belonged to another patient, Kennedy Calombotole. Inside, they found a blood-stained bedsheet and a blue slipper. A kitchen knife, also covered in blood, had been thrown from the ward window to the ground below. Calombotole was immediately arrested as a suspect. Even with the arrest, the case remains complex. Calombotole's identity is largely unverified, with no known address or family. Mental and medical evaluations have slowed proceedings, and the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions is still collecting forensic and medical reports. Calombotole is being held in hospital detention, not prison, while the investigation continues. 2 men in Manchester attacked police officers. Mohammed Fahir Ahmad and his brother, Mohammed Ahmad, were standing at a payment machine inside Manchester Airport when officers approached them to make an arrest. But the brothers had no intention of cooperating. Minutes earlier, Ahmad had been involved in an argument at a Starbucks cafe in Terminal 2. During the confrontation, he headbutted another customer and left the scene. The customer called the police, which is why 3 officers later approached the brothers in the car park. The moment an officer placed a hand on Ahmad to begin the arrest, he resisted. He pulled away, tensed up, and tried to avoid being restrained. As a second officer stepped in to help, Ahmad joined the struggle and threw a punch to defend his brother. What followed was several minutes of intense resistance captured on CCTV from multiple angles. The footage showed Ahmad swinging repeatedly at the officers as they tried to pull him away from the crowd. Ahmad could be seen stepping in and striking one of the armed officers. At one point, Ahmad grabbed hold of an officer from behind, which forced another to deploy a taser in an attempt to bring the situation under control. Even while on the ground, Ahmad continued to lift himself toward the officers, prompting one of them to push him back to keep him down. Body-worn camera footage later confirmed the sequence of events. By the end of the struggle, 2 officers were left with injuries, and both brothers were taken into custody. Ahmad was charged with multiple counts of assault, including causing actual bodily harm to 2 officers, and for the earlier assault inside Starbucks. Ahmad was also accused of assault causing actual bodily harm. Both men deny all allegations, and the trial is ongoing. Layer 3. Sarm Heslop's final movements. On March 7, 2021, something unsettling unfolded in the U.S. Virgin Islands. It began like any other night for Sarm Heslop, a 41-year-old British woman who had traded her life as a flight attendant for a new chapter at sea. She loved adventure, and the people close to her understood that about her. So when she left the UK in 2019 to sail across the Atlantic with friends, no one was surprised. That was who she was: brave, curious, and always searching for something more. 7 months into her travels, Sarm met 9-year-old Ryan Bain, an American captain who chartered his luxury catamaran to wealthy visitors. The two fell deeply in love. Sarm stayed on board with him and eventually worked as the yacht's chef. It seemed like the perfect life on paper: sun, sea, and someone she cared for. But that first charter she completed on March 7th would be her last chapter. Earlier that night, CCTV captured the couple leaving a bar, holding hands as they walked along a wooden dock by the water. They then boarded a small dinghy and headed toward Ryan's large catamaran anchored offshore. Nothing in the footage appears unusual, but within hours, everything changed. At 2:34 a.m., Ryan called the local police to report Sarm missing. He said he woke up to the anchor alarm sounding and realized she wasn't on board, But despite reaching out to the police, he didn't contact the US Coast Guard until 9 hours later. That delay meant the official search didn't begin until roughly 11 hours after Sam vanished. It was a critical time when someone in the water would have had the best chance of being found. Ryan told investigators he believed Sam must have fallen overboard after hitting her head or becoming disoriented while swimming. But when investigators pulled the CCTV footage, they spotted something troubling. Ryan claimed they were back on the yacht by 10 p.m., yet the footage shows them leaving the dock at 8:45 p.m., meaning they likely returned around 9 p.m. This didn't match his statement. Even stranger, 2 other boats were anchored in the same bay that night. Their captains later said that Ryan never alerted them to any emergency, not that night and not the next morning. For a professional captain, failing to notify nearby vessels was highly unusual. When investigators tried to search Ryan's yacht, he refused, citing his rights under the Fourth Amendment, which protects against unreasonable searches. He declined to let authorities examine the boat. He also chose not to answer further police questions, exercising his right not to provide statements that could potentially incriminate him. 5 weeks after Sam disappeared, Ryan left the U.S. Virgin Islands and has never returned. He later attempted to sell the yacht. Today, Sam Heslop remains missing. Her family, friends, and countless people following her case still hold on to the same unanswered question. What really happened on that yacht that night? Queen's curbside killing of Joanny Gomez Alvarez. 3 months after moving into a new apartment in Manhattan, Joanny Gomez Alvarez was settling into her new life. On the 14th of September 2025, she stepped out in a white crop top and jean shorts, spending the evening with her family and her boyfriend. Nothing suggested that anything unusual was coming, but just 6 hours later, everything would take a devastating turn. Around 4 a.m., Joanny, her boyfriend, her mother, and her mother's friend were leaving a neighborhood bar in Queens. As they walked outside, an intoxicated man sitting on the steps began shouting inappropriate comments at Joanny. Her mother and boyfriend stepped in to defend her, and a brief scuffle followed. The man broke away and walked toward his car. What happened next was something no one there could have imagined. CCTV footage shows the man driving onto the curb at high speed and striking Joanny, pinning her against a pillar while her mother watched. He then went forward again, hitting her mother and throwing her into the street. Witnesses reacted in shock, yelling and trying to stop the car as the situation unfolded. People banged on the windows as he tried to escape. A man picked up a trash can and threw it at the vehicle in a desperate attempt to slow him down. The driver sped off the sidewalk but didn't get far. Moments later, he crashed into a parked minivan. He then abandoned the vehicle and tried to run, but responding officers quickly took him into custody. On arrival, Joanny was pronounced dead at the scene while her mother was rushed to the hospital. The driver was later identified as 38-year-old Edwin Cruz Gomez. He was charged with vehicular manslaughter, murder, driving while intoxicated, and driving without a license. Her mother was stabilized, but she will forever carry the image of her daughter's last moments. Harshandeep Singh Antal. Harshandeep Singh Antal left his village in Haryana, India, with a dream many young people share. He wanted a better future. His family were farmers, and he hoped to build something bigger for himself and for them. In mid-2023, the 20-year-old moved to Canada to study business administration at Norquest College. He also hoped to one day become a police officer with the Edmonton Police Service. But, like most students abroad, he needed a job to support himself. In December 2024, He began working as a security guard at an apartment complex. What he didn't know was that the building had a history of trouble. Just weeks before he was hired, someone had been shot and wounded on the property. And sadly, danger was still close by. Only 3 days into his job, Harshandeep was patrolling the complex alone at night when he met 2 men in a stairwell. They began harassing him. Unprovoked, one of the men grabbed a sawed-off shotgun. CCTV footage showed them hitting Harshandeep severely on the head and pushing him down the stairs. He tried to run for safety, but he was not faster than the bullet. One of the men fired a shot that struck him from behind. The 2 suspects fled, leaving Harshandeep injured and fighting for his life. Emergency responders arrived and found him unconscious but still alive. They attempted to save him in the lobby before rushing him to the hospital. Despite their efforts, Harshandeep passed away about 10 minutes after arriving. Later that same day, both suspects were arrested and charged with first-degree murder. They were identified as Evan Rain and Judith Solto. Following the repeated incidents at the apartment complex, the building's owner decided to sell the property. Ganesh Visarjan Procession Crash. Ganesh Visarjan is a sacred moment in the Hindu community. It marks the end of the Ganesh Chaturthi festival, when the idol of Lord Ganesha is immersed in water. This symbolic gesture represents the deity's return to his celestial home. Families celebrate with music, color, and devotion. But during this year's Visarjan, one village experienced a tragedy no one could have foreseen. On the 6th of September 2025, villagers gathered on one side of a 4-lane road for the procession. Police had already blocked the route and diverted traffic to create space for the celebration. People were singing, dancing, and moving together toward the immersion site. At the same time, a truck driver approached the area. Despite the road being blocked, he drove past the barrier. When a biker appeared in front of him, he tried to avoid a collision. In that moment, the truck swerved, struck a 2-wheeler, crossed over the road divider, and went directly toward the crowd. The impact was immediate. Several people lost their lives at the scene, while many others were seriously injured as the truck pushed into the procession. By the time emergency responders arrived, 9 people had been confirmed dead, and more than 25 were injured, including the driver. The driver was arrested and later identified as Bhuvanesh. Although the Prime Minister announced financial aid and support for the families affected, no amount of compensation can erase the loss they suffered or the way this tragedy overshadowed a day meant for devotion and togetherness. Layer 4. Treadmill Tragedy. Corey Micciolo lived in New Jersey and, like many children of separated parents, split his time between his mother and father. He was cheerful, energetic, and curious, with a love for life. But in 2021, Corey's life would take a heartbreaking turn that shocked his community. Initially, Corey mainly lived with his mother, Brianna Micciolo. Years later, his father, Christopher Gregor, became more involved. Almost immediately, troubling signs appeared. Every time Corey returned from his father's home, he came back with cuts and bruises. Brianna reported the abuse multiple times, but her concerns were dismissed, possibly influenced by her past struggles with addiction. On the 20th of March 2021, CCTV footage from a gym revealed a deeply unsettling scene. Christopher sat a few feet away, while Corey struggled on a fast-moving treadmill. He repeatedly increased the speed as the child tried to keep up. Each time Corey lost his balance, Christopher forced him back onto the machine. When Corey returned home that day, the new injuries were impossible to ignore. At the doctor's office, he told medical staff that his father had made him run on the treadmill because he was too fat. Once again, His mother reported the abuse and tried to gain full custody, but the court declined her request. The following day, tragedy struck. Corey woke up at his father's house feeling unwell. He experienced nausea, shortness of breath, slurred speech, and difficulty walking. Christopher rushed him to the hospital, but while undergoing a CT scan, Corey suffered a seizure. Despite desperate efforts to save him, he died on the table. Medical examiners later uncovered injuries that raised serious questions about what had been happening behind closed doors. An autopsy revealed blunt force injuries, including contusions to the heart and liver, acute inflammation, and signs of sepsis. Over the next several months, forensic experts concluded that Corey's death was a homicide caused by prolonged physical abuse. Christopher Gregor was arrested and charged with aggravated manslaughter and child endangerment. In 2024, he was sentenced to 25 years in prison, 20 years for aggravated manslaughter, and 5 years for child endangerment, to be served consecutively. Irina Zarutska left Ukraine in search of safety. When the war began, she fled with her mother and sister, hoping the United States would offer stability and a chance to rebuild. In her new home, she worked multiple jobs, learned English, and slowly began to piece together a new life. By 2025, she was living in the Noda neighborhood with her boyfriend, taking college classes, and planning for a future she finally felt was within reach. On August 22nd, that sense of normalcy would shatter. Around 9:46 p.m., after finishing her shift at a local pizzeria, Irina boarded the Lynx Blue Line train. She sat in front of a man in a red hoodie, unaware of the danger beside her. 4 minutes later, without warning, he pulled out a pocket knife and attacked her from behind. He stabbed her 3 times from behind and once in the neck. Terrified, Irina raised her eyes to look at the man who had done that to her. She remained semi-conscious while everyone screamed and called for help, unsure of how a peaceful train ride could turn into a crime scene. A few seconds later, she collapsed and died at the scene. Her attacker paced briefly, then got off at the next platform, but he didn't escape for long. Police arrested him within minutes. He was identified as 4-year-old DeCarlos Brown Jr., a 14-time offender arrested for various crimes dating back to 2007. Later, his mother said that she had tried to have him involuntarily committed to a psychiatric hospital, but it was denied. Brown was charged with first-degree murder. But for Irina's father, still trapped in Ukraine and unable to reach the US, the legal outcome could never undo the loss. He was never going to see his daughter again. Chandra Nagamalaya. Chandra Nagamalaya managed a small motel in Dallas, Texas, where he lived and worked with his family. His co-workers knew him as calm and hardworking, the kind of person who helped keep the motel running smoothly each day. But on the morning of the 10th of September 2025, a simple misunderstanding turned into something no one could have predicted. 2 employees were cleaning the rooms on the ground floor when Chandra told one of them, Yordanis Cobos Martinez, not to use a washing machine that had stopped working. Because of a language barrier, Chandra asked a female co-worker to help with the translation. What should have been a routine moment instead sparked an argument. Cobos Martinez grew upset, offended that Chandra had needed someone else to communicate the message. Voices rose, tension built, and Chandra eventually stepped away to avoid further conflict. But the situation didn't end there. Minutes later, Cobos Martinez returned holding a machete. He began chasing Chandra across the motel property, forcing him to run toward the parking lot where his wife and son happened to be. Chandra cried out for help as his family rushed toward him, but his co-worker caught up before they could intervene. Witnesses froze, unsure of how to react as the confrontation turned deadly. Cobos Martinez hit his manager several times until he decapitated him. When it was over, Cobos Martinez walked away from the scene. Police located him on a nearby street shortly afterwards and arrested him. The investigation uncovered a complicated history. Cobos Martinez had been previously deported to Cuba, but the country refused to take him back due to his criminal record. He was later charged with capital murder and is now awaiting sentencing. If you want us to continue exploring the darkest corners of real-life mysteries, make sure to like the video, subscribe, and drop a comment telling us what you'd like us to cover next.